The courtroom was silent, packed with reporters, analysts, and legal scholars from around the country. Everyone had their eyes fixed on the 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court. But this day was different. The nation was watching. Live as the court heard arguments in a case that had already shaken the political world, a Florida ruling that exposed illegal lobbying linked to foreign governments. Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, stood tall as she entered the chamber. Her walk was confident, heels sharp on the marble floor. She wore a tailored navy suit and held a thick binder of legal notes. The cameras didn't miss a moment. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was a show, and Bondi knew how to own a stage. She had represented powerful people before, presidents, senators, but today she was defending a client accused of using foreign money to sway American policy. And her courtroom opponent, though silent, was someone even more powerful. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sat on the far right of the high bench, her face still and unreadable. She held a pencil, tapping it lightly on her notepad. She had been assigned to write the majority opinion in this case. Everyone in the room knew her questions could shape the outcome. Her eyes followed Bondi calmly, but something behind them was cold, watching, calculating. Bondi adjusted her microphone and began her argument. Her voice was strong, confident. She quoted the Constitution. She cited court precedents. She painted her client as a victim of government overreach. Someone punished for doing business in a complex global economy. At first, Barrett said nothing. She wrote notes, her eyes rarely leaving Bondi. Then came the question. Counselor Barrett said, her tone measured but sharp. Are you suggesting that foreign political funding, if funneled through private channels, should be protected under the First Amendment? The question hit hard. Reporters in the gallery perked up. The room went still. Bondi paused. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smirk, slight, controlled, but clear. A signal. Barrett saw it. Everyone did. And in that instant, something shifted. Barrett leaned forward slightly, breaking the stillness she had maintained for nearly 40 minutes. Let me rephrase, she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. Should the constitutional rights of American citizens be interpreted to protect foreign influence, especially when the source of that influence is hidden behind legal technicalities? Bondi hesitated. Her smile faded. She looked down at her notes. Then she looked back up, eyes defiant. That depends on whose interpretation of influence you're referring to, she replied. We don't criminalize association. We protect speech even if that speech is uncomfortable. Barrett's eyes narrowed, just slightly. It's not discomfort we're discussing, Ms. Bondi, she said. It's deception. A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. The other justices looked over. Cameras zoomed in on Barrett's face. It was subtle, but unmistakable. She had just stepped outside the safe zone of neutral judicial language. And everyone felt it. From the media section, journalist Evan Klein looked up from his laptop. He glanced at his producer, who sat next. To him, there's a story behind that silence, he whispered. His producer raised an eyebrow. You think it's personal? Evan nodded slowly. Look at Barrett. That smirk hit a nerve. On the bench, Barrett pulled back and returned to her notes. But her face had changed. She was no longer just examining law. She was confronting something deeper. Bondi continued her argument, but her rhythm had changed. Her voice wavered. She started skipping lines in her script. Her tone, once bold, now sounded defensive. She quoted an international trade case from 2003. Barrett interrupted. That case involved declared contributions from registered entities. This case does not. Why are you citing irrelevant precedent? Bondi's face flushed. Because the principle still applies only if the principle is applied in good faith, Barrett snapped back. Gasps rose from the public gallery. This was no longer just a courtroom hearing. This was something raw, personal, a confrontation between two powerful women with a history only they seemed to understand. Cameras caught Bondi blinking fast, her jaw tightening. Her smirk was gone. Evan began typing fast. He didn't know everything yet, but he knew this case was about more than law. It was about secrets, battled power games, and unresolved tension. Outside the courtroom, protesters chanted. Some were waving American flags. Others held signs accusing politicians of selling U.S. policy to the highest bidder. Inside, it felt like those accusations were becoming real. The session ended abruptly, as Chief Justice Roberts called for a recess. The judges stood. Barrett was last to leave the bench. As she turned, she glanced down at Bondi just for a second. Bondi looked away. Evan closed his laptop and stood. His voice was low, steady. She didn't come here today just to rule on law, he said. She came to finish something. His producer asked, "Finish what?" Evan stared toward the empty bench. "We're about to find out." Behind him, a TV monitor replayed the moment Barrett said, "It's not discomfort we're discussing. It's deception." The news anchor's voice echoed over the clip. And in the silence that followed, the real story began. The next morning, Washington buzzed like a hive. Every news outlet replayed the courtroom exchange between Coney Barrett and Pam Bondi. The phrase, "It's not discomfort we're discussing, it's deception," became the line of the hour. It was played on loop, dissected by legal panels, and printed in bold across front pages. But to those watching closely, it wasn't just a tough question from a Supreme Court justice. It was a sign, a signal. Something had been triggered. In a quiet office at CNN's investigative unit, Evan Klein watched the footage again. He rewound to the smirk, paused, zoomed in. "There," he said. His editor looked over. "What?" "That smirk." Barrett's eyes narrow right after it. "She knows something. It's not just legal. It's personal." The editor raised an eyebrow. "You think there's history?" "I'm sure of it," Evan replied. "And I know where to look." He opened an old folder labeled Vienna Conference 2019. It was from a closed-door summit attended by U.S. judges, attorneys, and international policymakers. Barrett and Bondi had both been there. The event was barely covered at the time, only a few blurry photos, one short press release. But in one image, Evan noticed something odd. Barrett and Bondi standing alone near a marble corridor deep in conversation. Barrett's face looked stern. Bondi's expression strained even then. He called a source who had worked security at the Vienna summit. "Do you remember any conflict between those two women?" The man paused, then said, "There was something, not public." But after one session, Barrett refused to join the closing dinner. "Told a colleague she was done being silent. That's all I know." Evan wrote it down. Done being silent. He remembered Barrett's courtroom glare and began typing. Meanwhile, inside a private Capitol Hill office, Senator Lena Ortega opened a sealed envelope that had arrived without a return address. Inside were 3 pages of classified communication. MALZ. "I mean, my Kaner, look at this, and we all, look at this, and we all know I've been exploring that. Well, with MAW, MAWAWO, PAWAWA, KWA, Imbizit Considey. I call Convusi Conwide. I requate Convua, MAWA, MK, with Communities, MATAMATAY, Concali Sef Conwy, MAYAF, Adeptimi A de ICW, between defense contractors and a PAC tied to Bondi's former campaign." One line stood out. "Pam can keep the door open with Barrett. She still owes us from Vienna." Lena froze. Her hands shook. The date was from 2019, the same summit. She picked up her secure phone. "Get me someone from the Judiciary Oversight Committee now." At the Supreme Court, Barrett sat alone in her chambers. Her clerks had stepped out. She stared at the legal briefs in front of her, but wasn't reading. Her mind had gone back to Vienna too. That trip had changed everything. It wasn't just the arguments in the conference room. It was what she discovered afterward. Files passed. To her in secret, a folder that had contained proof of backdoor dealings, political manipulation, and threats to judicial independence. Pam Bondi had been involved. Barrett never forgot. But back then, she had stayed silent, told herself it. Wasn't her fight? Now, she knew better. In the courtroom, Bondi prepared for day 2. Her team noticed her mood had shifted. She was quieter, more cautious. She flipped through her notes, distracted. "You're okay?" her junior counsel asked. Bondi nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. She knew Barrett hadn't forgotten Vienna. And if Barrett decided to speak, even through carefully crafted legal language, could destroy everything. That morning's hearing resumed. Bondi began her rebuttal, but this time she was less aggressive. She avoided eye contact with the bench. Her tone was softer. Didn't matter. Barrett's first question came just 6 minutes in. "You're defending the legality of a funding channel that passed through 4 shell companies registered offshore. Have you confirmed the identities of all contributors?" Bondi responded. "We verified compliance under current law." "Compliance," Barrett repeated, "not transparency." The tension returned. Barrett's voice didn't rise, but the words carried weight. When foreign governments attempt to influence U.S. elections using legal gray zones, is it still lawful or just cleverly disguised interference? Bondi stumbled. "That's a question for Congress." "No," Barrett interrupted. "That's a question for this court." A murmur rose from the press bench. Outside, protests were growing. Demonstrators gathered on the court steps. Some demanded accountability for foreign influence. Others supported Bondi, calling the trial a political witch hunt. The city didn't sleep that night. News anchors on every major channel kept the footage running Barrett's pointed questions. Bondi's shaken voice and that final exchange about Vienna. Commentators speculated, lawyers debated, and online. Threads exploded with theories. But while the public argued, something much quieter and far more dangerous was happening behind closed doors. In her private apartment in Georgetown, Senator Lena Ortega stared at the leaked documents again. The emails mentioned a series of payments masked as consulting fees funneled through foreign shell companies. The timing matched campaign support for 3 state-level elections and a federal judicial nomination hearing. One name appeared more than once: Pam Bondi. But what chilled Lena wasn't Bondi's name. It was the line at the end of the 3rd email. "Justice A will never speak. She knows silence bought her seat." "Justice A, Amy." Lena picked up her encrypted phone. She called Evan Klein. "You still awake?" she asked. "I haven't slept since the hearing," Evan replied. "Need to show you something," she said, "but off the record, you'll understand why." 30 minutes later, Evan sat across from her in a quiet, guarded room. She slid the documents across the table. He read them carefully. His expression changed. "You think this is about a deal?" "I think it was." "But not anymore," Lena said. "Barrett's not playing along this time." Evan looked up. "What happened in Vienna, Senator?" Lena paused. Something changed her. There was a meeting off the official schedule. Only 4 people were there: Barrett, Bondi, a federal contractor, and someone from the UAE legal office. "I was told to stay out of it. Now I know why." Evan leaned forward. "And you think Barrett's going public?" "Through the case." "She can't say it directly," Lena said. "But her questions, her tone, she's already speaking." Meanwhile, in a luxury hotel just blocks from the Capitol, Pam Bondi stood alone on the balcony of her suite. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Texts from political allies, legal consultants, and media handlers all said the same thing: control the story. But Bondi knew the story wasn't hers to control anymore. Inside, one of her advisors watched the coverage on TV. "Justice. Barrett doesn't just want to win this case," the advisor muttered. She wants to ruin you. Bondi turned. She's not the only one with secrets. The advisor looked uncertain. If she breaks silence, the deal falls apart. It won't just be you. It'll be the whole chain. Bondi stared out at the Capitol dome glowing in the night. Then we remind her what silence costs. The next morning, as the hearing resumed, something strange happened. A sealed envelope was delivered to the court. It wasn't addressed to any specific justice, but it was marked confidential, chambers only. Barrett received her copy. She opened it in silence. Inside was a single photo. Vienna, 2019. She and Bondi standing face to face. Behind them, barely visible, was a table. On that table, a document with 3 signatures. One was hers. Her hand tightened around the paper. She remembered that day, the pressure, the threat, the whispered warning from Bondi. If you want. The seat signed the agreement. Barrett had never spoken of it, never even told her husband. She had signed something she never fully read under the belief it was ceremonial, but the moment still haunted her. And now someone was reminding her that they remembered too. In the courtroom, Bondi began her final round of arguments. Her tone had returned to fire and confidence. Her voice filled the chamber. This case is about freedom, she declared. Freedom for Americans to engage globally, to invest, to partner, and to prosper. Our Constitution does not stop at the border. Barrett did not move, but her eyes watched every word. Justice Barrett, Bondi added, once stood in a room where these principles were honored. I believe she remembers them well. The words were subtle, but to Barrett they cut like a blade. It was a message, a threat disguised as praise. Evan, sitting in the media gallery, felt the air change. He opened his laptop and typed one line, a coded warning delivered in plain sight. After the session, Barrett stayed behind in her chambers. She locked the door. She picked up the photo again, stared at her younger self, a version of herself, still hungry for recognition, still uncertain. She had grown since then, changed, but that paper, whatever it truly was, had tied her to something she had never truly escaped. Until now. She picked up her pen, opened a legal pad, and began drafting her preliminary opinion. The first words were, when the law is bent to serve shadowed alliances, the Constitution becomes a mask rather than a shield. She paused, looked out the window, then kept writing. The truth was coming, not shouted, not confessed, but carved, line by line, into history. The courtroom was packed again. Day 4 of the hearing had begun, but something felt different. The air was heavier. Tension hung in every corner. Reporters whispered among themselves, cameras adjusted their focus, and clerks moved quietly along the edges of the chamber. Everyone could feel it. Something was building. Pam Bondi entered with a calm face, but the sharpness in her step was gone. Her team followed close behind, heads down, whispering among themselves. They had seen the headlines that morning. Barrett's past comes into play. Was Vienna a turning point? Anonymous photo hints at supreme ethics scandal power, silence, and a signature. What Justice Barrett might be hiding the photo had leaked. Someone had taken it from the confidential envelope and sent it to the press. And now the entire country had seen the moment from Vienna, Bondi and Barrett, standing too close, too tense, next to an unsigned document that should never have existed. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was already seated at the bench when Bondi arrived. Her face gave nothing away, but her hands were still, her notes perfectly arranged. She looked like a woman ready for a decision, not a debate. As the court called the hearing to order, Bondi stood and began her final presentation. Her voice was clear, but every word was cautious. This court has always stood as the final defense against political manipulation, she said, trying to steady her tone. And while foreign business, international strategy, and campaign finance are complex matters, they remain governed by law, not by suspicion. Barrett looked up. "You speak of law, Ms. Bondi," she said, voice calm. "Let's speak about the law behind silence." Bondi hesitated. Silence. "Yes," Barrett said. "When a lawyer enters a private meeting with foreign officials and signs a document she does not fully disclose, does that silence still count as professionalism? Or does it become complicity?" The room froze. Bondi gripped the podium. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying," Barrett said. "I'm stating." Gasps. Not from the audience, from the legal teams. Even the other justices looked over. "Okay." Barrett never broke eye contact. "Because when I signed that page in Vienna," she continued, "I was told it was ceremonial. It was not. I learned months later it had been used to justify lobbying decisions that skirted our Constitution." Bondi whispered, "You knew this whole time?" Barrett nodded slightly. "And I've been silent until now." The courtroom exploded. With noise. Chief Justice Roberts struck his gavel hard, calling for order. The press gallery buzzed like a hive. Evan Klein stood halfway up, typing into his phone. "Breaking Barrett breaks silence on Vienna. Admits signature used in secret lobbying deal." Bondi's hands shook. Her voice cracked for the first time. "Justice Barrett," she said. Voice thin, we both knew what that summit was about. "Can't turn around now and pretend," Barrett interrupted sharply. "Pretend. I'm not pretending, Ms. Bondi. I'm correcting." The silence that followed was deep and full of weight. Bondi tried to recover. She turned to the bench. "This is a courtroom, not a television studio. If we start putting personal regret ahead of legal reality, we collapse the very principle of justice." Barrett replied, "Justice is not built on hiding discomfort behind technical language. Justice starts with accountability." Cameras in the back of the courtroom zoomed in. Barrett's expression was steady, but her voice carried emotion, not rage, but quiet resolve. Something deep had broken inside her, and now all that was left was truth. Bondi stumbled through the rest of her argument. Her voice no longer filled the chamber. Her eyes kept darting to the press gallery, to Evan, and finally to Lena Ortega, seated quietly in the corner. After the session, Bondi walked briskly down the hallway. Reporters swarmed. Questions flew. "Ms. Bondi, is the Vienna document real? Did you pressure Justice Barrett into signing it? Will there be an investigation?" She didn't answer. She kept walking. Inside Barrett's chambers, the justice removed her robe and sat down slowly. Her hands were shaking now. The weight of what she had said in public on record was finally setting in. But she felt no regret. She picked up her draft opinion again. The lines were sharper now, her words less cautious. "This case is not only about funding or speech. 'Tis about the space between law and power, and how silence, when weaponized, becomes betrayal." Evan watched the footage again in the CNN newsroom. Then he turned to the camera. "This is no longer just a legal case," he said to viewers. "This is a reckoning. One where the court, the media, and the public must now decide what is justice when the truth has been buried beneath layers of law for years." On social media, reactions flooded in. Some praised Barrett for courage. Others accused her of hypocrisy. But no one could deny the courtroom had become the stage for something much larger law. The world watched in stunned silence. Within hours, every major network across the globe had picked up the story. Justice Amy Coney Barrett had broken ranks. On live television, inside the most powerful courtroom in America, she admitted to signing a document she had once kept buried, a document tied to a secret lobbying deal during a closed-door summit in Vienna. But it wasn't just the confession that shook the public. It was the way she said it, calm, controlled, devastating. And then came the line. "Truth doesn't tremble, Miss Bondi. Power does." The phrase caught like wildfire. Squalled across protest, scrawled across protest signs, echoed in late-night monologues, and carved into headlines from London to Lahore. It was printed on T-shirts and quoted in editorials. Students painted it across campus walls. Political analysts called it a moment of reckoning. Inside the courtroom, though, the silence after the words landed was long and unbearable. Pam Bondi stood frozen behind her podium. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her lips trembled. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her eyes darted, searching for footing in a place where she had once controlled the narrative. But this time, she wasn't in control. Her knees buckled slightly. A clerk moved to help her, but she raised her hand. She wouldn't fall. Not here, not now. But everyone had already seen the truth. The firebrand attorney, once known for her sharp comebacks and unshakable tone, had no defense left. She slowly turned, stepped away from the podium, and sat down beside her legal team, her face pale, her shoulders sunk, her eyes glassy. One tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. In the media gallery, Evan Klein's hands hovered over his keyboard. For the first time in his career, he paused. The moment didn't need a headline yet. It needed to breathe. But the thought in his mind was loud. She broke, live, and everyone saw it. Outside, the Supreme Court steps were flooded with protesters. And journalists, some chanted for reform. Others called for investigations. Whispers spread through legal circles, political corridors, and foreign capitals. If Barrett was speaking, now what else might she say? Inside her private chambers, Justice Barrett removed her glasses and stared at the wall. Her clerks sat silently, unsure if they should speak. One of them finally asked, "Are you all right, Justice?" She looked over. "No," she said softly. "But I'm honest. That has to be enough." At the Department of Justice, senior officials held an emergency meeting. Bondi's involvement with foreign-funded PACs, long suspected but never proven, was now tied to public testimony from a sitting justice. A sealed internal memo had already circulated. Request preliminary investigation into Vienna 2019 communications. In a private room at CNN headquarters, Evan reviewed hours of archived footage. He searched for one moment the scene in Vienna that the public had never seen, and he found it. It was grainy, shot from a handheld camera. In it, Bondi could be seen handing a folder to Barrett. She spoke for 6 seconds. The audio was faint, but with a boost. The tech team made out the words, "Sign it, Amy, or they'll choose someone else." Evan leaned back in his chair, stunned. The meaning was clear. The judgeship. The seat on the Supreme Court, it had come with a cost. He didn't publish the video yet. He knew what it meant. And once it was out, there would be no turning back. Later that night, Bondi stood by herself in a dark conference room. Her phone buzzed. It was her political handler. "Damage control's failing," the voice said. "They want a press appearance. Apology, clarifications, something." "Not apologizing," Bondi whispered. "You have no choice. She's turned you into a symbol." Bondi hung up. She stared out the window. The same words echoed in her mind. Truth doesn't tremble. Power does. She had built a career on power. She had worn it like armor. But now, the truth had cracked that armor open in front of the entire nation. And the woman she thought she controlled the tire, one who had once signed a quiet paper in Vienna, had risen in a way she never saw coming. In the early hours of the morning, a short video was uploaded to the court's official website. Justice Barrett, seated alone in a dim chamber, stared into the camera. "I signed something I should not have signed," she said. "Not out of corruption, but out of fear. Fear of losing what I believed I had earned. I was wrong. I will not be silent again." The clip was only 90 seconds. It changed everything. Evan finally filed his story. The line that broke the wall. Barrett's confession, Bondi's fall, and the battle for the soul of American justice. Pam Bondi watched the segment in silence. She sat alone. And for the first time in her life, she had no words. The stage was set for one of the most anticipated live interviews in U.S. political history. The network had named it The Final Word, Barrett and Bondi. But only one woman had agreed to appear, Amy Coney Barrett. Pam Bondi, despite pressure from donors, legal advisors, and allies, declined. Her team claimed she needed time for reflection. Others said she was negotiating behind the scenes to avoid federal charges. But the truth was simpler. She had nothing left to say. The public knew it. The media knew it. And Barrett more than anyone knew it too. The interview aired live across every major news platform. No dramatic music, no flashy intro, just a quiet set, a single chair, and the nation watching. Barrett entered in a dark, simple dress. No robe, no podium. Just a woman carrying the weight of her own past. Evan Klein sat across from her, his notes in hand. But he didn't look like a reporter tonight. He looked like a witness. Justice. "Barrett," he said, "thank you for being here." "I'm here as Amy," she replied. "Tonight, titles don't matter." A pause. Evan nodded. "Let's begin with Vienna." She didn't flinch. "I was offered a seat on the Supreme Court under the condition I play along," she said. They never said it directly, but the message was clear. Stay quiet about the lobbying structure. Don't challenge the connections. Keep the doors open for those who made it possible. "And you accepted that?" Evan asked carefully. "I accepted the silence," she said. "Not the corruption. At least that's what I told myself at the time." Evan leaned forward. "Do you regret it?" Barrett's voice lowered. "Every day. But I regret even more that I said nothing when I knew Bondi was using the same tactics to climb higher. I should have stopped her before this case." The studio was silent. "But you did stop her," Evan said. "You did it on record, live, in front of the entire nation." Barrett shook her head gently. "I didn't stop her. I revealed her. There's a difference. On social media, millions watched. Young law students live tweeted every line. Human rights advocates praised her honesty. Others demanded she resign for hiding the truth so long. Barrett expected all of it, and still she continued. "When I said, 'Truth doesn't tremble, power does,' I wasn't speaking to Bondi. I was speaking to everyone still pretending not to see." Evan looked at his next question, then folded the card. "Let me ask you directly," he said. "Are there others?" Barrett didn't blink. "Yes." Evan hesitated. "Will you name them?" "Not here," she said. "Not yet." "Record will speak. My draft opinion is nearly finished. When it's published, it will make clear how the influence moved who it touched and how far it reached. But it won't name names. It will show them," she said. "Then names will reveal themselves." Back in Florida, Bondi watched the interview alone in her home. The lights were off. Her legal team was gone. Her phone buzzed with news alerts she refused to read. She stared at the screen as Barrett spoke. "I stayed silent for years because I thought it was the only way to protect the court. I was wrong. Silence didn't protect the court, it weakened it." Bondi whispered to herself, "You're burning the bridge you walked on." "'Kay," but even as she said it, she knew Barrett had already crossed. The interview moved toward its end. Evan asked one last question. "What happens now?" Barrett looked down for a moment, then up. "Now the people decide. The court can write opinions, but the country writes the legacy." The studio lights dimmed. The interview ended, but the storm did not. Within hours, Congress announced it would open a bipartisan investigation into foreign-funded influence over judicial nominations. The Department of Justice released a statement confirming it was reviewing materials from the Vienna summit. And Pam Bondi's former staffers began receiving subpoenas. In a university lecture hall in Chicago, law students watched the full interview. A professor paused the screen after Barrett's final line. This, he said, pointing at the screen, is what happens when silence breaks louder than any speech. Evan Klein, back in his newsroom, filed the closing segment for the night. He stared into the camera, calm but intense. Justice Barrett sat in silence for years. Then she stood uphand, used that silence like a weapon. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse. And in doing so, she changed. Everything. And in a quiet corner of her apartment, Barrett folded away her notes. She had said what needed saying. The rest would be written in the law. The decision was released on a Monday morning by 9 a.m. The plaza outside the Supreme Court was surrounded by cameras, protesters, and reporters. Helicopters hovered overhead. Inside the court, the atmosphere was the kind of calm. That came before a storm. The ruling was 5-4. The court had sided against Bondi's client. In its decision, the justices declared the Florida ruling unconstitutional. The majority opinion, written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, would become one of the most powerful judicial texts in decades. But it wasn't just the legal language that stunned readers. It was the opening paragraph. Power unchecked will always find new languages for deception. When silence is rewarded, it spreads like a virus infecting courts, governments, and the soul of a nation. This opinion is not just about funding structures or foreign channels. It is about the courage to see what we once refused to look at. For many, it felt like a verdict not only on one case, but on an entire era of hidden influence and political denial. Inside the courtroom, the justices sat still. Bondi was not present. Her team had requested a virtual summary, citing medical stress. But everyone knew she was avoiding the cameras. Evan Klein stood at the back of the courtroom, notebook in hand. His headline was already written. Barrett breaks the system that once protected her. He watched as Barrett handed her written opinion to the clerk, her expression blank but firm. Outside, Senator Lena Ortega gave a brief press statement. The ruling today marks a shift, not only in law, but in accountability. There will be hearings, there will be answers, and there will be consequences. Reporters asked if Barrett would be called to testify. She's already testified, Lena replied. She did it in the clearest language a judge can use legal truth. Later that day, at a quiet press briefing, the Attorney General confirmed that the Department of Justice would open a formal investigation into the Vienna documents. A task force would be created to examine the pipeline of influence between foreign governments and judicial nominations over the last 15 years. And Pam Bondi. She held a press conference from her Florida estate. Gone was the sharp blue blazer, the fiery stage energy. She stood before reporters in a simple black dress, her voice hoarse, her face tired. I will not challenge the decision of the court, she said. There are things I did to preserve power. Things I justified for the sake of what I believed was right, but maybe this is how democracy survives through pain. A few reporters clapped quietly. Most just stared. One asked, "Do you feel betrayed by Justice Barrett?" Bondi looked down, then up. No, she said. She did. What I never could? She let the truth speak. That night, CNN aired its final special on the case. Evan Klein narrated over a slow montage. Bondi's smirk, Barrett's whisper, the courtroom silence. The breakdown, the interview, the ruling. He spoke calmly like he was closing a chapter. When this story began, was about a courtroom clash to powerful women with a history. But it became something else. A reminder that silence is never neutral. That power built on secrets will always crack. And that sometimes justice comes not from shouting, but from the moment someone finally decides to stop lying to themselves. In the last scene, Barrett is seen walking alone down a long marble hallway. The camera does not follow her, stays behind. She disappears into the shadows, no applause. No press. Just the sound of her footsteps and the words she had written in her ruling echo quietly in the background. Let this opinion mark a turning point, not because we ended corruption. But because we stopped pretending it wasn't there, the screen fades to black, the story ends, but the echoes remain.